What's up, guys? Just wanted to share some testing results with my setup. So it's kind of like a mid-range, I would call it, depending on what country you're in, but a bit of a mid-range budget system. 5600X air cooler is the sacrifice I had to make with B450, and some fairly budget Team Dark ZA RAM, which is I think 182222 by default, and I was able to tune the subtimings down to 60 ns while keeping all the voltages very reasonable. So IOD, CCD, and VDDP are all at 0.9. So very conservative, but at the same time, this should be more achievable for the majority of people. So it's not like I've got balls to the wall system where I'm running like a 240 or a 360 millimeter AIO or a custom loop and C14 RAM that costs $300. That's really expensive. And this is just more of what I would think an average user would try to aim for on a moderate budget. So you can see the full specs. The case that I'm running is Philippine based. It's Radeon, and looking at the results of other owners of certain other cases, such as the LANCool 2, which is one of the best airflow cases you can get according to Gamers Nexus, the Radeon is actually very comparable, because I was looking at another owner, LANCool 2 owner that had a 5600X, and I tried simulating the settings he was running, and it came within about I was actually running 5C cooler than him, but there's other variables. It might have been something to do with his fan curves. But in other words, I was able to just at least perform on par or better than a LANCool 2. It is a mesh case with, I think it has pretty good airflow. So anyway, the purpose of this video is just to share the results of testing on Windows 11 with the latest CPPC and latency fixes from AMD and Microsoft. And CPPC is mainly to do with the preferred core scheduling between Windows and the chipset. I'm fairly sure the chipset driver on how whatever, I don't know if it's the algorithm it's using, but basically it communicates the preferred core or the best cores properly to Windows. And there was a bug in Windows 11 where it wasn't doing that, and it was getting mixed up basically. So it's mainly meant to benefit the precision boost and precision boost overdrive algorithms, not all core. So if you're after precision boost single core performance, that's where CPPC is more important. If you're not, you could completely disable it, and you wouldn't really notice any difference apart from idle power consumption with the stock or PBO algorithms. So all core is not affected by CPPC at all. This is the testing here. So you can see I did complete stock with PBO disabled. 1.24 volts in the BIOS was the reading I got with my setup, and you can just see the numbers here. Now, looking at these numbers, they are going to look off if you know what the 5600X can score with a good AIO cooler, or if you've been looking at benchmarks from other websites that have the multi-scores around 4400, 4460. Let's just see a few websites. This is Guru 3D, 4390, and for stock, 4350. So you can even see there was a bit of variance here. TechSpot was able to get 4460 with whatever they were running in their ambience, and between different websites, different review sites, 4390 and 4350. So it was like a downwards trend, but you have to look at the test bench they were running because, and I have to give context to my results, because the Cinebench or your whatever testing you're doing is heavily affected by your ambient room temp and your cooler. So if your cooler is not great, like a budget user that uses the stock cooler, you're not going to get anywhere near what the review sites are advertising the Cinebench to perform at. It doesn't perform like that. So there's a good post on Reddit of someone that actually tested with their 5900X, and they show clear frequency temperature scaling. So if I show his little graph here, you can see that even at 70 degrees, this is not in Cinebench R20, it's in Cinebench R23, which is a longer benchmark. I like to use R20 because it's quick, but in Cinebench R23, at stock, see this blue line here, stock, he was getting 20,448 at 70 degrees, and there was clear performance scaling all the way to 38 degrees, where he was able to get an extra, over 1,000 extra score. So if you just kind of like translate that over to Cinebench R20, a few hundred points from the temperature is completely reasonable. And then when he undervolted, we're using the curve optimizer, you can just see his score shot up quite noticeably due to the limits and how the algorithm works, where even at 87 degrees, he had more envelope to get higher scores, and he was getting higher clock speeds. But you can still see clear temperature scaling here. So that means anyone on a stock cooler cannot use a reference, like cannot go to this website and use it as a reference for, oh, well, I should be scoring around X number. You don't know, because all of the websites are using top of the line cooling. So that's where my testing might actually be a bit more relevant to the average user. If you're on a budget cooler, $30 or less, then this would likely be applicable to you here. And this is just another, this is Gamers Nexus. They also cover the Ryzen frequency scale, and you can see from 75 degrees, around 4050 on all core, and then at 50 degrees, it was getting an extra 150 megahertz, going down to 50. So that can affect a synthetic benchmark quite easily. So I just wanted to share that for a bit of context, but you can just see here, CPPC off, preferred off, all core was unaffected on all three different types of configurations you could be running, because you can turn CPPC off and preferred off, but you can also have it like the normal CPPC is on, but preferred specific core is disabled or enabled. So you can have one or the other, or both, or yeah. But you can just see here in the middle, CPPC on, preferred on. This is what should have been fixed with the latest chipset driver, and the single core went down compared to CPPC completely off. So in other words, it's not completely fixed, or it doesn't work that well. And you can see here, I did try to log the ambient room temp, so you can try to account for that. Maybe that affected it a little bit, but see, it was even running cooler here. Actually, it was 30 degrees. It was the same temperature. So CPPC completely off does run slightly higher idle power. The current did not go down, so that's where you'd want CPPC on for that power saving. So as you can see, both of the on tests here have a nice idle power current of 4.94 amps, and everything else is about the same. So you can just take a look at that, look at the numbers, and for the tech-savvy users, I recommend you just interpret this data that I've done for yourself. Don't let me tell you what it means. You can already take a look at the scores, take a look at the numbers, and I've got a gallery showing screenshots of all the testing, starting with PBO disabled to with CPPC off, with both CPPCs off, and then like number 1, number 2, it's in this order. And then after getting to the bottom of here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then it goes 8, 9, 10, 11 for validating the settings I chose to use for gaming testing over here. So if that makes sense, just start here for the CPPC in the gallery here. So if I open this gallery, you can have a quick look. I've tried to number it, so you can just click and verify that I've actually logged the right result. And that's what came up. Like after doing the benchmark run, I'd just take a screenshot and log all the data. And I was resetting the resetting hardware info between runs. I did multiple runs if it seemed off, like if the score seemed low, because sometimes Windows 11 seems to have a bit of inconsistency with its benchmarking compared to Windows 10. With Windows 10, I could run 3 runs of Cinebench Multi and get within a few points every single time. Sometimes with Windows 11, I don't know what's causing it. Maybe the L3 bandwidth hasn't been completely optimized yet, but randomly I'll get 200 points lower than normal, and that's with everything in the background closed except for exit lag, which I was running on Windows 10 as well. Like I had that in the background. It shouldn't really hurt anything as long as as long as one of the settings for real-time optimization is disabled. That's the one that will load the CPU a little bit. This one here, real-time optimization. So as long as that's off, exit lag, once it's loaded, doesn't really affect Cinebench or anything from my own testing. But you can test this for yourself if you want to try to replicate it. Just do the CPPC off, preferred off at stock, and see if there's a difference between the idle current. That's the main thing. And Cinebench R20 single going down, even though it's only a small margin, I ran it multiple times. I could not get over 580 with CPPC on, preferred on. And then when I turned preferred off, it went straight back up to 585 first go. And I ran it a couple times just to verify. And if you see like a ×2 or a double, it's just because the score is questionable that I ran it more than once to make sure that that's what it was getting. And all of these between reboots or between testing, I would sit at idle to get the idle readings, meaning all the background reboot, like when you first boot up your system, all the background tasks should have finished by then. Because I would literally sit there waiting for the idle vCore to drop down to whatever it was meant to go to. And it was all within margin of error for the stock settings. And then for The all-core, it was about 4.5 watts higher at idle, and the idle current was about double, as you can see here, or not double, but a little bit more than, less than double, but yeah, about 3 amps higher. And to me, that's not really a risk factor, because as long as you're using the system, you never actually see these kinds of idle. You have to like not touch the mouse and be at complete desktop. If you're running anything in the background, you've just got a browser open, or you've got a game that you've left alt tabbed, you won't see this kind of nice idle power. And what's going to matter more is the load power. And as you can see, the 45 times all-core just completely destroyed stock settings in all scenarios. So except for single was competitive, but 448 versus 4259, 4267, and 4266. Now this is with the whole frequency temperature curve. That's how it behaved with my particular cooler, the Deepcool GAMX 400 Pro, which is a dual fan slim tower cooler. So you can also see the temperatures there. It's not that hot. It's actually very cool running, but this is the type of scaling I was seeing with my setup. And then I went into more thorough testing, which was more of a PBO undervolt versus all-core undervolt. So all-core tuned to the lowest I could get it stable versus PBO using a curve optimizer to the lowest I could get it stable. And the funny thing is, the reason I didn't do like stock PBO testing is because if I leave it on motherboard limits, the temps just shoot up, and it kind of defeats the purpose of an undervolt. When you're undervolting on a budget cooler, the goal is usually to get your temps down, not to make them go up. So this is best case scenario PBO versus all-core undervolting. And you can just see the temperatures here. I wasn't able to do all the testing at exactly the same time for some of it, as you can see here. But when I did do the gaming benchmark runs, I ran the AC off, shut the room door, and normalized 32C ambient, because it is hot here in the Philippines. And I kept it at 32C ambient, like I didn't run the AC. So you can just see this is the results here for the gaming, and I've also got videos of all these gaming runs. So for every run, starting with stock limits minus 30 curve, it's a whole video showing 3440, and then I lower the resolution. I do it all in one take. So 3440, 1440, ultra wide, which is fully GPU bound, and you can just it's kind of like to give you an idea of the lower CPU load type of performance, what it runs at when it's not being maxed out, and then slightly GPU bound, and at 96 to 98. And this is the interesting thing, is there is a difference. Like the scaling is not linear. As soon as the game is less GPU bound, at not 99%, you can see different scaling behavior if you just look closely at these benchmarks. So you can see, for example, 45 times all-core went down to 161 on 95%, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a very accurate benchmark. Like you can run it back to back, you'll get almost bang-on results every time. So I really like it for that, and I chose to give the CPU game result, which is more, the game actually calculates the benchmark between CPU and GPU performance together. But it separates them into CPU game and GPU game, and it just gives you an average. It doesn't give you the 95% overall. It gives you 95% on the CPU and 95% on the GPU. And since we were doing CPU testing, I logged that. And then it's got another interesting column in the benchmark results where it gives you CPU render. And what I think this is this is the max. I don't know if it's a completely separate metric that it's logging, but max rendered frames, as far as I can tell, when it's not like GPU bound. If it was just having, if it was more of in a competitive scenario, this is what the scaling was like. So you can see if all core is outperforming PBO undervolt or not. And I want you guys to interpret this for yourself, though. I don't want to say this is better, that's better. I've only highlighted in blue what I think ran the best voltage and temps relative to the other results. So 45 times all core relative to stock limits minus 30 curve, it had, better render, better CPU game, better FPS, noticeably better CPU temperature, lower voltage, lower vCore, lower current. Everything was like lower, and then the performance was within, even though it was within margin of error, it was cooler. So this was the best result for me. But I've only highlighted those to catch your attention, but not necessarily for what you would want to pick. Especially if you're on a different cooler where your behavior or your temperatures might be in a different range to mine. This will give you an idea of scaling. But then if your temps are still a bit high, if you're running a stock cooler and you're at 80 degrees, you might choose to go with a different, whichever one. Like if you, another example would be if you leave your computer at idle at the desktop for long periods of time every day, like 5 hours at a time, you would, at first for better temperatures, you might lean towards 45 times all-core, but because the PBO and stock algorithms have better idle power consumption, leaving your computer for long periods of idle is obviously going to be better with stock or PBO. So you can just see all these values here. Stock limits with a -30 curve. Now, I did give a bit of context here. There's a weird issue on the B450M Motor Max, and this has been between two BIOSes, where if you enable PBO, set a negative curve, and then disable PBO, you'll be at stock, but the negative curve will apply to your. So I was getting basically an undervolt on stock that would normally have clock stretching, but because it was using curve and not like override voltage, I wasn't getting any clock stretching. It was scoring, around the 45 times all-core result, even higher. And you can just see here this multi-score, 4511. It was actually fairly impressive for compared to full stock, which is 1.2 volts and 4266. Probably because of the power envelope as well. Like having a negative curve gives it more headroom to clock up. Yeah, not necessarily temperature bound, but power bound. So you can just see that here. And what else did I want to share? So I've already gone over all of that. It's pretty much just these links. You can just look over it for yourself and come to your own conclusions, basically, because I do see a lot of posts. If someone will post their all-core benchmark on Reddit, I see people jumping in and they just jump straight in. They just want to comment, why would you all-core? It's worse. PBO is smarter than all-core. It's not. It depends on your CPU binning. If you've got a good bin CPU, if your CPU can undervolt under 1.2 volts, which I think a lot actually can, but people don't even bother because they've seen all the videos saying don't use all-core, you can end up with a really good all-core performance compared on a budget cooler compared to PBO, where you have to dial in a negative curve. It's harder to kind of get consistent behavior because it's very temperature based. So when you do all-core, you don't have to worry about that frequency scaling. All-core just gives you whatever X performance. Like I could be running at 70 degrees and my all-core results will be the same at 60 or 70 or 80 degrees because it's not scaling on an algorithm. And that's where if you're having issues with your game, like you'll game for 30 minutes, and I've seen posts like this, someone will be like, oh, when I first start gaming, it's all fine, and then after about 30 minutes, it starts stuttering, or I get FPS drops. That can be from the algorithm trying to adjust for higher temperatures, because your case is heated up, maybe you've got an airflow issue, whatever. But if you're on all-core, that wouldn't happen. So that's where there's a benefit. And then if the people arguing that, the other argument I've seen on Reddit that nobody even corrected the person, but people were all like, what would you call it? They were all mob mentality. They were just all jumping in and liking this comment where someone said, well, all-core is bad because fixed voltage is going to degrade your chip. And that's not even giving any context because when you all-core, you're not at a fixed voltage. It shows fixed voltage in hardware info if you don't know what you're talking about, and it'll show like 1.1 on the vCore or in another tool. But the thing you have to be aware of is hardware info and those other telemetry tools only record the telemetry given from the CPU under the stock algorithms. Once you disable the stock algorithms, the telemetry is not being reported anymore. Like, this is the best way I can explain it, is the telemetry doesn't get reported anymore, and you just see this static voltage. That's what you set in the BIOS, right? But parking still happens, and downvolting still happens. Your frequency will still show 4,500 megahertz, for example, 45 times all-core, but you'll still be getting 0.2 volts at idle. Your wattage will just be slightly higher, and your current will be slightly higher, but this is kind of inconsequential. It's just like a little bit of power saving. But once you're under any type of load, you can see here, the 45 times all-core was running cooler than full stock. So if you're just like trying to decide, am I going to run PBO all-core because I want my temps lower or my power consumption better, under any kind of load, you can see lower temperatures and everything. And you can just see that here as well. PBO with -30 curve, so the best I could get it, 1.231 load vCore, 64 amps, 92 watts under Cinebench R20 multi. And even 46 times all-core, 4.6 gigahertz on all cores, was running lower amperage and lower voltage on my chip. So if you've got a decent chip that can downclock, all-core can actually quite handily beat PBO undervolting. So not at the top end though. If you're talking about max performance, max single core scores, and you're competitively benchmarking, PBO is the way to go because you do get that advantage of higher single. Like you can see here, the single's better. I didn't try to hide that. I've highlighted it green. The single core frequency was better. The single was better, and then the multi, relative to everything else, was good as well. That's why I also put that green. And the effective multi is only relative to whatever performance you were getting at stock. Because Cinebench R20 is not a very heavy benchmark, it's not a stability test. Even at full stock, the effective multi goes 3991 because the cores actually park during the benchmark. It's not like intensive enough to fully load everything max capacity without dropping clocks at all in the background. You just don't see it. Like if you've got a tool open, you won't see it, but the effective multi can be recorded in hardware info. And that's why I've put this effective multi column, just so you can see what Cinebench thinks about your average clock speed when taking into account core parking and power saving. And you can see even with all core, we were still getting that behavior where the effective multi was lower than the actual clock speed. But in relative performance, we weren't getting heavy downclocking or really bad scores. It was only 45 times all core with a lower score because it is lower than the stock algorithms that go up to 4.6 or higher. So yeah, and I'll just show you really quick. If you're one of them people that didn't know about the all core actually parking at, with an all core. If you didn't know about it, open Ryzen Master with an all core and take a look at the average and watch the cores. So this is with recording running. I'm not sure if we'll get any sleep behavior. There is 1 or 2 sleeps. If I let go of the mouse and just sit here really still, but I think the recording is going to stop it from fully sleeping. But again, you can verify this on your own. Just sit at idle, don't record anything like me. And if you sit at idle, you'll see it going to 0.231 volts, and you'll see the power going down to 5 watts, roughly. So you do get better wattage and slightly better current at full idle, but that is only full idle. You have to take it into account. If you don't sit at your desktop doing nothing and you actually use the PC and you turn it off when you're not using it, or you put it into sleep when you're not using it, then the full idle doesn't actually matter, and then the load temperatures are what will matter. And all cores undervolt is beating PBO undervolt with my cooler in a best case scenario kind of thing. So for example, if I use minus 20 curve or minus 10 curve, this shoots up higher, and I get higher temps and worse voltage behavior. So you can't argue that all core runs hot. It depends on the chip, and that has to be given more context, because I've seen a lot of sites basically saying don't waste your time with all core, instead of saying it depends. It depends on the quality of your CPU. Try it out. Try 1.2 volts. If you can boot and run a light benchmark, try going to 1.15 and then do it again, and then go to 1.110, and you'll probably crash at 1.110, or you won't be able to boot. Make sure you know how to clear your CMOS, and then try 1.12 until you get some form of stability at the lowest possible voltage, and then go into heavier stress testing. So that's kind of like the method I use. I went 1.2, okay, booted in, 1.15, booted in, 1.110, crashed, cleared my CMOS, 1.12, booted in, but crashed during Cinebench, and then 1.1375 was where I was able to run Cinebench, ReLive, memory stress testing. Everything was stable at 1.1375, and then in the BIOS vCore it shows 1.142 for me. So that's my minimum stable vCore, and any 0.01 lower will have instability. And I did all the recording as well, so obviously if I was able to run 45 times all core and 46 times with multiple runs of fairly CPU intensive game, you can also see that as a testament to the stability of the system. And I had 0 crashes through all of this testing that I did with all these settings. 0 at these actual settings, so not tuning them in, but when they were actually running, 0 crashes, 0 weird behavior, no application crashes, no hangs, no BSODs, nothing like that. So as far as my setup is concerned, it's stable for what I use it for. But if you ask, I know there'll be some people saying, is it Prime 95 8 hours stable or whatever? I'm not running folding at home for 24 hours a day or 8 hours a day, that's the kind of workload where I would want prime stability. But for literally the past 5 years since my 6700K, I have not used Prime, and all the systems I've overclocked for casual and rendering gaming use have not used Prime and been rock stable. So my 6700K at 4.5 gigahertz delidded, I can't remember the exact voltage, 1.32 volts, is still going strong on my kid's PC, and it was never Prime stabilized. I used RealBench for 30 minutes, and it's been stable for years now. So literally, I could like bring up screenshots of that if someone was interested. But it's been delidded though, so that helps with the stability. Having the temperatures lower, it runs around 50 degrees for gaming. My 3600 was overclocked and undervolted the same method, and my 5600X, and all three systems now using the same very quick and easy method have all been stable. So I could go over it in an overclocking guide. I might do that if I get more requests. I've had a couple requests for a overclocking guide, but I wanted to kind of just share some results just to give people ballpark ideas when they're overclocking on a budget cooler, because I don't see it. There's no big review sites really covering what the real performance is, other than high-end 360mm AIOs and custom loops and 22C ambients, which is completely different to 30C ambients. Yeah, you could even get one of them good coolers from the big review sites, bring it to Philippines, test here, and you'll have completely different scores, and your results will be different. The Cinebench will be different. So I wanted to just get this out there to give people that baseline of this is how Gamax performs, Gamax 400 Pro, in a Radeon, which is a $50, less than $50. It's 1,700 to 1,800 pesos on sale. It's like a $30 case, $30 or $40 USD case, and you know, there's cases like the Landcool 2, which is a much more expensive brand, and they're 5,000 pesos here in Philippines. The Radeon is like 1,800 pesos. So, you know, just to give a bit of an idea of what kind of performance you get for your money when you go for a branded thing. But yeah, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, you want to know about anything, I'm happy to answer them. I didn't go into this at the start of the video, but I do have about, well, I'm 34 now, so about 20 years of, that seems old. I have about 20 years of overclocking experience as a casual user. So I am an enthusiast, but I'm not a hardcore overclocker in terms of trying to get max benchmark results. I overclock for efficiency and improvement over stock. So if you just compare my results to stock, and the 4266 CB I was getting, which I tested multiple times with CPPC being changed every time, not getting over 4300 CB on my setup, and then you look at the all-core performance, it's like 200 to 300 points higher, and it is better at underload than PBO and stock, even on -30 curve with that weird bug in my BIOS. So it's kind of like, yeah, just to give you that idea that I do have experience with this, and I was actually looking at all the posts saying all-core is no good, and I was, after testing with my 3600, which I didn't really make a video about, after undervolting my 3600 and seeing how low the voltage could go stable on an all-core with consistent performance, I was just mind-boggled that there are so many people putting all-core overclocking down, like manual overclocking, and they're saying PBO is better and it's better, safer for your system, but PBO voids the warranty. Enabling Precision Boost Overdrive voids your warranty according to AMD. So if it voids, and the warranty is only 2 years, right? 2 to 3 years, depending on where you are. If PBO voids a tiny 3-year warranty in regards to the lifespan of the CPU, if they felt that enabling PBO is enough to void your warranty, how can you say that it is unquestionably safe to use PBO versus all-core, and all-core is going to degrade your chip? I think that a lot of people have just bandwagoned onto that idea, and it really does depend. If you can get under 1.2 volts, as you can see here with my stock performance, if you can get under 1.2, you could still have better results than whatever it was giving at default and on auto settings. So yeah, I do hope more people test this. There are other videos from other YouTubers floating around. Like, you can find it. There are some of us that have done this testing where all-core is outperforming PBO, and it's much better than PBO from a conservative standpoint, but it's kind of not a mainstream concept for some reason. It's not mainstream that all-core is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're going to argue about voltage and current, depends on the chip. You can't blanket term and say that all-core sucks and PBO is the greatest. It's not that clear-cut, especially if you want consistent performance at varying temperatures. If you don't have stable room temps, and you're not running top of the line cooling. So yeah, I'm kind of like going in circles, but thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.